Dear third year students, I'm starting again a lesson, studying lesson section 2, that is listening, dedicated to listening, as part of the third year program that hasn't been covered last year due to the pandemic. I hope you're having your books opened on page 114. And there we are, we're starting the lesson. Here we go. So this lesson is mainly about vocabulary, building the vocabulary items you need. You will find, because it is a listening lesson, you'll find the two listening passages in the comment section, in the description section below, just below the video. So we're starting with the first section of the lesson. You're supposed to write the following words or expressions under the headings in the table below. Whether the words or expressions I already know the meaning of, the words you know, the words or expressions I've heard about but I still don't know the meaning of, words that you've heard about but don't know what they mean, and last, completely new words that you have never heard about. So you're supposed to put these words under the correct headings according to whether you know them or you don't. Moving on to the second section, in which we're supposed to match the words with their definitions. So let's bear in mind first, when it comes to grammar, that the synonym of a word is going to be from the same grammatical category of the word. For nouns, for example, like ethics, we'll find a word in the synonym, in the synonyms that is the same, from the same grammatical category. So the synonym of a noun and the antonym of a noun, for that matter, is a noun. Let's start with these words. Let's start with controversial, which ends in al, so that is going to be an adjective, and that is something that causes controversy. So that is going to be a, likely to cause prolonged argument, especially about social, moral, or political matters. Some people are for, some people are against. Let's start with the first, ethics. That's a noun. And it means a set of principles of proper conduct. What is good or bad? A system of moral values. Issue or issue, and both are correct, is a noun. So we mean a question that arises for discussion. For example, some people are discussing globalization, whether it is good or bad. It is an issue, and that issue is controversial because it causes a prolonged argument, and some people are for and some people are not. Moving on to 4, DNA. DNA is a molecule found within a structure known as a chromosome. You can see that picture in here. That is the cell in which you find, inside the cell, you find the nucleus, and inside the nucleus you'll find the chromosome, inside which you're going to find the DNA, which is made of proteins. Going back to the book. So DNA is a molecule found within a structure known as the chromosome. 5, cloning. Cloning is a noun. Cloning is creating a new organism without the need for a male and a female. Creating a new organism from just one cell, or rather creating a copy of an organism from just one cell without the need for two partners, if we're talking about humans. In 6, gene therapy. We're talking about gene therapy in humans here. It's a therapy mainly about genes, and that goes for insertion of normal DNA directly into cells to correct a genetic defect. So these are the words that we have in hand in the second question. Moving on to the other page, page 115. You're supposed to study the following definitions. Consider the key words and the specific references, then write each word or expression from the list below in front of its corresponding definition. So we're starting with the first. The genes a person will pass on to his or her children, that is germline. And every person is going to pass on to his or her children a set of genes which we call germline. The analysis of a human DNA or RNA, recombinant DNA, chromosomes and proteins in order to detect the possible presence of an inheritable disease. Making an analysis of human DNA to detect if there is a possibility for an inheritable disease to be passed on from parents to children and from children to grandchildren. So because it is an analysis, so that is going to be a genetic testing or a DNA testing. We're talking about DNA testing here. So A, germline, B, DNA testing. C, the process in which liquid blood changes into semi-solid. Blood which circulates in your veins, in your body, is rather a liquid. But if it goes out, or because of some diseases, it becomes semi-solid, and that's what we call blood clotting. A structure within the nucleus that contains DNA, that's chromosome. Next, the checking of an individual's genetic material to predict before the right time, to predict present or future disability or disease, either in the individual or his or her children. That is going to be genetic testing. The testing that is made on genes of a person to predict if he or she is going to have future disabilities or diseases, or diseases that will appear in his children or grandchildren, offsprings. F, a gene altered, changed somehow or created by genetic engineering, especially for use in gene therapy. And here we're talking about design a gene. That's a gene that humans make or humans design by altering it or changing it for some reasons, of course, that we're going to see later. In B, have you ever heard of genetic engineering? If you don't, we're going to have the definition later. So because it is called genetic engineering, it will be applied on certain creatures, but not all things. We'll see that in details in number 2. Read the following statements. One of them is irrelevant. We're going to cross it out. The application of genetic engineering to humans is a reality. Because humans have genes, we can apply genetic engineering on them. We can alter or create, we cannot create, but we can alter and change genes in a human. B, there are genetic engineering techniques practiced on food, especially when I talk about plants and crops. And when that is a reality, because plants have genes too, we can change some of the characteristics of these plants. In C, there has been much talk about genetic engineering applied to rocks. Because rocks are not living creatures, they don't have genes, and as a result, this statement is not correct, because we cannot apply genetic engineering on rocks, because rocks are not living creatures. So this is the statement to be underlined or crossed. In D, animals are the subject of genetic engineering. Yes, that is correct, because animals are living creatures, as we said, and living creatures have genes. So we can alter and change their genes for some reasons to cure some diseases or to make them live longer, give us more food or milk or meat or better food. The following text is definition of genetic engineering taken from that encyclopedia. I'm going to read it and focus on the uses of genetic engineering. In the first line, I'm reading genetics. We're talking about genetics, not genetic engineering here. Genetics, as you see, ends in ICS, which is something that you find in many words that are talking about sciences. So genetics is a science, is the science that studies all aspects of inherited characteristics. We're talking about characteristics that are inherited from your parents or grandparents, the study of which is called, it is a science and is called genetics. Now, genetic engineering is the application of that science. Genetics is the study of that science, and genetic engineering is the application of that science, of the knowledge obtained from genetic investigations to the solution of such problems as. So we can use genetic engineering to solve these problems as food production by making plants and animals produce more food, waste disposal, getting rid of waste, medicine production to make medicine, and treating diseases. Included in genetic engineering techniques, there are many techniques that can be included in genetic engineering, are a range of procedures that alter, which means change, the reproductive and hereditary processes of organisms. Depending on the problem, the procedures may involve artificial insemination of animals or humans artificially, not naturally. Cloning, we've seen the meaning of cloning. We said it is the creation of a new organism from one cell without the need for two people or animals or plants. In vitro fertilization, which is an artificial way of fertilization, or the direct manipulation of the genetic material itself by the recombinant DNA technique. So these are the techniques that can be used in genetic engineering. Moving on to section C, we're supposed to match these pictures with the corresponding comments that we have on the following page. These are headlines from newspapers. We're going to match them with these pictures that we have in the following page. So one is a picture of that sheep in here. Sheep is a word that is singular and plural for sheep, that animal in here. In front of a human who might be the person who cloned Dolly the sheep. And that can be found in C. In 1996, Dolly's birth was heard around the world. It was a popular event because it was the first mammal ever cloned from a single adult cell. As you can see, from one cell we can clone animals, plants, or maybe humans. Dolly's birth was very, heard around the world because it was a popular event at that time, because it meant that cloning is possible. Why was it that important? Because it was a mammal, and as you know, we humans are mammals. By a mammal we mean an animal, or for that matter a human, that gives and provides its young with milk. Back to the pictures. The second is a picture of that child, newly born child. So that is going to be D. In 1978, the birth of baby Louise, the first child conceived through in vitro fertilization. So the mother was uh, did receive the mother received in vitro fertilization, that is artificial insemination inside a laboratory, not naturally. The midwives Patrick Steptoe and R.G. Edwards of England. Back to the pictures. Number 3. The animal we have in the picture in here is a pig. We're talking about pigs in here, which is the story we have in A. In 1985, Ralph Brinster's lab creates the first transgenic livestock. By livestock, we mean animals that are used by humans for their meat or sorry about that, for their meat or milk. Pigs, as an example, that produce human growth hormone. These pigs, these animals, were modified somehow genetically to produce human growth hormones that are used to make humans grow more rapidly. In 4, as you can see, we have a number of women here marching in the streets with some banners. You can read on that: women are not dogs for breeding purposes. So that is going to be that is going to be in D, because we're talking about no, in F. These people are marching in the streets, making a demonstration because of this piece of news. In 1986, artificially inseminated surrogate mother Mary Beth Whitehead carries baby M, we don't want to give the name here, to full term. Humans remain in the wombs of their mothers for 9 months. That's the full term. Then she tries to keep her, and she fails. We're talking about a surrogate mother here. By surrogate mother, we mean a mother who carries the baby of another woman, either as a favor or in return for money. Surrogate mothers are not supposed to keep the children they give birth to, and that's what Mary Beth, the surrogate mother, tried to do, and she failed in that, probably because the other mother, the biological mother, tried to sue her in courts, and the judge obliged her to give the child back to his biological mother. So surrogate mothers are the women or females in animals that carry babies of other women. That is the picture we have in here. So probably there was a demonstration in support of the surrogate mother. In 5, these are frogs, little frogs. And that is supposed to be, little frogs are called tadpoles. In G, in 1962, John Gordon cloned frogs using cells from all the tadpoles. That is an instance of cloning, another event in cloning history. Moving on to 6, that's a horse, an animal, maybe a female horse, and we're talking here about a zebra, which is not that different, but it is a different animal. That is supposed to be B. In 1996, the world's first test tube gorilla. Nope, that is not a gorilla. Definitely not a gorilla. We're talking about, yes, E. Cloning might be one way to protect endangered species of animals or plants that are in danger of extinction. We might have no more animals of one species, and that's why we can use cloning to save them. But zoos are using other reproductive methods. At the Louisville Zoo, a surrogate mother horse, as you can see, we can use here surrogate mother for animals too, gave birth to a zebra that had been conceived in a lab dish. Everything happened artificially. The surrogate mother was artificially inseminated, and it gave birth to a zebra that is not her young. Moving on to the last picture, a picture of a baby gorilla, and that is going to be B. In 1996, the world's first test tube gorilla, Taimu, was born at the Cincinnati Zoo. Gorillas are important because they are, according to what people believe in science, very similar to humans, because humans and some types of primates share some traits. Moving on to the listening passage, as I said, you can find the first presentation, the first listening passage down in the comment, not in the comment, in the section below the video. I'll leave it there for you. In the following list, there is an element that is not mentioned in the presentation. Identify it and tick it. So the speaker in the passage talked about all these things except one, which is dealing with obese, fat people. So that was not part of the listening passage. So he talked about gene therapy, germline gene therapy, creating designer babies, recombinant DNA techniques, and the future of genetic engineering on humans. We're going to see in which we are supposed to complete with the appropriate pieces of information. So we got gene therapy first. So it is used for these reasons. One, to repair I'm reading from the passage, something that you will hear in the listening passage. Gene therapy is used as yet experimentally to treat cancer. So that is the first thing we're going to complete in here, to treat cancer. That is one thing. When treating cancer with gene therapy, we don't need the traditional way of treating cancer, which is with chemicals and other types of therapies, which are not always safe. Repair, they can be used to repair damaged or missing genes. So it can be used to repair damaged genes or replace missing ones. We can replace missing genes or repair the ones that are damaged. Moving on to the third use of gene therapy, and that is to avoid. When we use genetic therapy to treat cancer, for example, we avoid the problems that arise from the use of traditional treatments. So to avoid the damage that is done to other tissue, from traditional ways of treating cancer, such as radiation or chemical therapies. Moving on to germline gene therapy. Germline gene therapy. I'm reading from the passage in paragraph 2. Genes and artificial chromosomes can also be inserted into embryos in a process known as germline gene therapy. You can hear that, you can listen to that in the passage. So genes and artificial chromosomes can also be inserted into embryos. We can insert genes or artificial chromosomes into embryos of babies in a process known as germline gene therapy. This could be used to cure genetic disorders. If we know that someone is going to pass on some genetic disorders to his children, we can insert genes and artificial chromosomes into the embryos to stop that from happening. So you can use it to, this could be used to cure genetic disorders. Or to insert genes which enhance intelligence. That make children better at their education, or more intelligent and more athletic. I mean better at sports and practicing sports. Creating designer babies, however, is meant to meet the wishes of the parents. Thus, creating new hope for parents who need a cure for their sick children. We can use designer babies to meet the wishes of the parents by giving them the possibility to stop some things to happen to their future children, or to cure the sicknesses and illnesses some of their children have and face. In recombinant DNA techniques, they can be used to determine whether a person suspected of committing a crime is guilty or not. If someone commits a crime, for example, killing someone, he or she might leave something there in the scene of the crime. For example, parts of his hair, or something that he used to eat or drink, and that can be used to determine who did that by making a DNA test. Another use of DNA testing, recombinant DNA techniques, can be seen in proving the parental link. If we find a person who says that that man or woman is my parent, we can prove this link using recombinant DNA techniques. We test both their DNA to know whether they are a parent and a child or not. Last is to establish ancestry, and that's what I was talking about, to prove the parental link. In proving, so recombinant DNA techniques can determine whether a person suspected of committing a crime is guilty or innocent It can also establish the identity of dead bodies. If we find someone dead, and we don't know who he is or she is, we can use recombinant DNA techniques and compare that to some suspected relatives, and we can know for sure if who that person is. To prove parental links is another use. So these are the uses of recombinant DNA techniques. Moving on to, we're done with that task. How does Mark Eden, the speaker, support his point of view? Well, he mainly used reference to his job, because he's working in medicine, and when people working a job that is related to science, we as listeners or readers tend to believe in what they are going to say. That's why many people refer to their jobs, or they can use other ways to support their points of view, such as numbers and figures, which were not used in this passage. But he also used something that he used is examples, real life examples. He gave the example in the beginning of Ginger MP, who had breast cancer. That is what I'm talking about in task E. And he also used the example of 4 black men who were accused of killing a woman. And last, he used the example of Ms. X, who gave her daughter for adoption. We start with the E. So he used examples and reference to his job, which is related to science, so that people believe him and get convinced and trust what he's going to say. E. Mark Eden talks about specific cases as examples. Listen to Ginger MP's case and complete the paragraph. You can put play the passage that I uploaded. I'm reading that a woman from California in the US, Ginger MP, had advancing breast cancer. Breast is spelled BREAST. Since it had already spread, SPREAD, we mean moved to other organs, from the breast, which is an organ, to other organs. Since it had already spread to major organs, that is spelled ORGANS, when diagnosed, gene therapy was the only choice. The noun from choose, that is CHOICE. She was injected, INJECTED, injected with genetically engineered drug. Over the next year, her tumor, TUMOR, shrank. That is the opposite of spread. It shrank, became smaller in size by 25%, and after 3 years, they almost disappeared. So this is used by Mark Eden as an example that gene therapy works and can be used to treat cancer. Her breast cancer was spreading, and when she was injected with a genetically engineered drug as part of a gene therapy, her tumor shrank by 25%, and after 3 years, they almost disappeared. Moving on to F. The examples we used, he said, are 3. That of, in the beginning of Ginger MP, that we have seen a moment ago. The woman from California who had breast cancer, and gene therapy was the technique used. His ex, however, in the end of the passage, was looking for her daughter, whom she gave for adoption, and DNA testing was used to prove the parental link between her and her daughter. The four black men were accused of rape and murder, and DNA testing was the technique used to prove that they are innocent. Because as you know, rape is having sexual intercourse with force with someone, and that leaves evidence that can be used in a DNA test. Which of the three cases mentioned by the speaker, these three cases caught your attention most, and why? Volunteer to retell the story to your classmates. So try to write a sentence or two about which one of these cases caught your attention most. If we're going to start the answer, it would be the case that caught my attention most was which one, and then because, and you complete with that. Next, we're having a set of cartoons that are used to explain the possible outcome of cloning humans. Reorder the following cartoons to get a coherent story. Write your answer in the table below. That is the table we have in here. So we got the first one already done. That is 1C. So C is the first. It goes, we have two characters in here. One that looks like a clerk, maybe a manager, or a CEO, chief executive officer, or the owner of a company, and someone working on a computer. He might be a clerk or an employer, but he has, glasses in here, wearing glasses and a tie, so he might be a scientist. The boss says, I need a brilliant employee to be my assistant manager. So he needs someone to help him being his assistant manager, and he wants him to be brilliant. So he says, that's the first nice thing, says the F, says the employer. He thought that he's going to promote him to assistant manager, but the boss is thinking about something else, which is cloning himself. Your job, he says, is to clone me. Then E goes, yes, the technology exists. And he says, no, G before, that's why I came to you. So I got C, and then F, and then G, that's why I came to you. And then E, yes, the technology exists, to clone you exists, but it's illegal to clone humans. It is against the laws to clone humans, he says. Then B, if the cops find out, we can frame my clone for the crime, says the boss. We can find a way to, frame that if the cops, we mean the police officers, come and know about it. That is so wrong, says the employee. Why? He'd do the same thing to me, says the boss. And last is the result, the outcome of cloning a human. That creature is very strange. It's rather what we call a freak, with the legs of a horse, the antennas of a snail, which is satirical, that we have a horse which is known for being very fast while running, and the snail which is known for being very slow. And the head and the face of his boss. The message is that although it is scientifically possible, the technology exists, and we can never be sure about the results of cloning humans, because humans are not machines that can be easily made. Humans are complex creatures that in the fact that they're complex is due to being made up of not only the organs that work together to make us alive, but we also have feelings. We have a mind, a soul that science has not yet defined clearly, and that is not easy to identify and recreate. So we're starting to see the negative uses, the negative outcomes and disadvantages of cloning. Moving on to C. Regroup the following words into pairs of opposites. We're talking about antonyms in here. We're starting with they are all verbs except some. Show as opposed to conceal. Deny, to say no, I didn't do it, it wasn't me. That's to deny. And confess is the opposite. Shrink, to become smaller in size. The opposite is spread. Innocent, the opposite is guilty. You are innocent if you haven't done anything. You are guilty if you did, for example, a crime. Agree, the opposite is object, and both are verbs. Succeed, fail. Spread, as we said, the opposite, spread in here, as opposed to shrink. Enhance, reduce, although these are not the exact opposites. Enhance is to make something better or bigger. To reduce is usually related to numbers being smaller. Moving on to D and completing the following table with the missing forms. I'm reading them quickly and then we'll go to the summary. Treat is the verb. Treatable or treated is the adjective. The noun is treatment. We can add ment. Diagnose is the verb. Diagnosis, diagnosed, ed is the adjective. And diagnosis, sis, is the noun. When you go to a doctor, he asks you questions to know what your disease is, and that's what we call a diagnosis, sis in the end. Choose is the verb. Chosen, the past participle, is the adjective, and choice, choisce, is the noun. Disappear is the verb. Disappeared, ed, is the adjective. Disappearance, we're going to add ance to get the noun disappearance, as in performance, which is a noun from performed, ed, the adjective, and the verb is perform when we leave the ance out. Cure is a verb. Cure is also the noun. The adjective is curable, able. Insert is the verb. Inserted is the adjective, the past participle in the form of the verb plus ed. And the noun is insertion by adding ion. In suspect, you have suspicion in the person. When you have your own suspicions, you are not sure about someone, whether he's good or bad. A suspicion ends in cion. Suspect is a verb and suspected is the adjective. You can also use suspicious as an adjective for someone whom you are not sure about, as we said. Suspicious, and the adjective ends in cios. We have no verb in innocent, which is an adjective. The noun is innocence and ends in nce. Release from prison, for example, and if someone is innocent, they're going to release him from prison. The adjective is released, ed. The noun is release, the same word. Prove is a verb. To be released from prison, you need to prove your innocence. So prove is a verb, to bring evidence. Proved is the adjective, or proven. The noun is proof, proof. OOF. Proof is the noun. Curiosity is the desire to know more about someone or something, to know what's going on and what's happening. The excessive desire to know what's going on, that's curiosity, and the adjective is curious, that is curious. Avoid is the verb. Avoidable is the adjective, something that you can avoid, you can not do. Avoidance, as in performance, is the noun. Confess is to say, yes, it was me. Yes, I did it. That's to confess, as opposed to deny. The adjective is confessed, ed, and the noun is confession. So as we said, we're going to see how we did that. We added some suffixes. ance, as in disappearance. ment, as in treatment. We added ion, or to get tion, which is found in many nouns. So we added these to get nouns. We added also able, as in curable, and we use the past participle sometimes to get adjectives. So we can use these suffixes to get these two forms of words. Moving on to the second part. Not yet. We're still in the first part. E. Look at the following cartoons. Are Dennis in the first two pictures and Lolita in the third good examples of cloning humans? Imagine that Dennis and Lolita were cloned humans. How can you describe them? Having a look at the first picture, it looks like these are the parents of Dennis. He is going to school, apparently, with the school bag on his back, and he's waving at his parents in saying goodbye. But it turns out that he didn't go to school, and that he's using that, I don't know how to call that thing to play. He's playing with a code, a dangerous game, and he's shooting people or animals with that thing, which is also a dangerous thing to do. But Lolita is a different story. Imagine that he's her husband or father or brother. He's saying, we'll rent a trailer, that's a truck, that can be used as a temporary home, travel across the country, take in the sights, go to see some sights. How does that sound? She says, whatever. She is apparently not interested in anything anymore. She's just watching TV, um, with the room being messy, uh, unorganized, untidy. So apparently, Dennis and Lolita aren't good examples of cloning humans because one of them is unruly and naughty. Here we're talking about Dennis, while the other, Lolita, is lazy, untidy, and careless. As you can see, the room is far from being um, tidy. The question next goes, is cloning humans allowed? So, cloning humans, scientifically speaking, is possible, but it is at the same time irreligious. It is against all religions. It is also immoral, I mean unethical, and these are all adjectives. It is also inhuman and illegal, against the laws, against all religions. It is unethical, it is inhuman. Imagine how a cloned human is going to feel when he knows that he was cloned. He was conceived in a laboratory and not the result of a relationship between a man and a woman, which is the natural thing to happen. So that is why it is inhuman, because we did not ask that person for his view. Moving on to the second presentation, listen to Jane Spencer speaking and find out whether she is for or against genetic engineering. So we heard Mark Eden in the first presentation speaking, and he was for genetic engineering, and Jane Spencer is going to be the opposite, is going to be against genetic engineering, and she's going to list a number of disadvantages of the use of genetic engineering on humans. And she's going to talk about some techniques that she's going to mention. As you play the passage, you're going to go through this paragraph that starts as follows. Gene therapy has got numerous side effects. The side effects are the unwanted consequences of using a drug, a medicine. For example, you take a drug, a medicine for fever, but you get other problems. So gene therapy has got numerous side effects during testing, such as fevers, that is spelled FEVERS. Abnormal, getting very high temperatures, that's fever. Abnormal blood clotting, we've seen blood clotting when blood becomes semi-solid. Partial paralysis when someone can't move his body parts, hands or legs. It can be total or the opposite, partial paralysis, that is spelled PARALYSIS, and even death. Jesse Gelsinger died after receiving genetic therapy. You know, genetic is spelled GENETIC. After receiving genetic therapy at the University of Pennsylvania in the US, doctors inserted a cold virus virus, into Gelsinger's liver. Liver is an important, very important organ in order to cure his genetic disease. Instead of curing his genetic disease, this is what happened. Instead, his heart, that's another important organ, HEART, his heart, liver, and kidneys, the two organs that are also important. That is, kidneys is spelled KIDNEYS, kidneys, were harmfully affected. There are also ethical issues. You know how to spell ethical? ETHICAL. These are the ethical issues, some of the ethical issues. Who will have access to these expensive technology? This technology expensive, so not everybody is going to be able to pay for the technology. People in rich, developed countries, by developed we mean they are already developed, rich nations such as the US, Canada, Norway. Developed is spelled DEVE, developed, DEVELOPED. Or people in poorer, the opposite of developed is developing, DEVELOPING, areas of the world. Developed, we mean rich countries. Developing, we mean poorer countries that are still in the development process. What happened to Jesse Gelsinger, who said that he died as a result? He didn't. I'm sorry about that. His heart, liver, and kidneys were harmfully affected. That is the result of, that's what happened to Jesse Gelsinger. Some of his organs were harmfully affected. We're going to listen to part 2 and answer these questions. In what way has DNA testing become a business? And what kind of questions does DNA testing raise? So please do that on your own. By saying, isn't that crazy and unethical? Jane here expresses, is it a threat? A threat is when you tell someone, for example, I'll beat you up, I'll kill you. So that's a threat. Or does it express criticism when you criticize someone by telling him about the negative aspects he or she has, or about the bad things about his project or what he does? So that's to criticize. Approval is when you accept a thing. So it is clear that Jane expresses criticism here. Moving on to G. Each of the expressions in the box below is made up of two words. That's what we call compound nouns. Compound nouns are nouns that are made up of two nouns, as in Jane, which is a noun, and therapy, which is a noun. Breast is a noun, cancer is a noun. They go together, and these are called compound nouns, but they are not pronounced the same way because the stress falls on the first one, as in gene therapy, funeral homes, burial services, designer babies. The second noun is more important. When you, for example, funeral homes They are homes first that offer funeral services. Breast cancer is a cancer, and then we'll discuss and see what organ does it affect. So the piece of information that we have in the first noun can be omitted and is an optional information that is not as important as the one we have in the noun. So the second noun is more important, and these are two nouns that together make a compound noun. Moving on to the following important question when it comes to writing. Now that you have listened to the two presentations, which do you agree with most? Do you agree with Mark Eden or Jane Spencer? And of course, why? So you're supposed to bring about a number of arguments to say why you are for or against genetic engineering. Moving on to grammar. Here we're going to see prefixes. Prefixes are used to give the opposite meaning of the words that follow them, as in abnormal, which is the opposite of normal, unwanted, the opposite of wanted, unethical, inestimable, etc. These are just examples. We're going to see the rest. Moral, the opposite is immoral, incurable, illegal, inhuman, unacceptable, UN, which is not in the list here, unsuccessful, disappear, irresponsible, misunderstand, irregular, disabled, and unknown. As you can see, prefixes can be used to give the opposite meaning of these words. Moving on to the homework task. The following statements are related to genetic engineering of animals and plants. We're talking about crops. Crops are vast plantations of plants that are used for food. Read and say whether these statements are for or against genetic engineering. So we're talking about these statements, not your own opinion, but whether these statements are for or against. So genetic engineering of animals, we're talking about the application of genetic engineering on animals. 1. Transgenic animals can be created so that their organs can be transplanted into humans. So we can take some organs from animals and transplant them into humans to help them overcome a health problem. So that is definitely for, because it is an advantage. Genetic engineering combined with cloning can be applied to animals to make valuable pharmaceuticals. We can make many types of medicine that are important and valuable thanks to cloning and genetic engineering. So that is an advantage. So it is 4. Saving endangered species or salvaging extinct ones. We can save some species that are in danger of extinction, or we can recreate extinct species of animals. This, according to this statement, number 3, is simply science fiction. This means, according to this statement, that it is impossible it is science fiction, it is not a reality, that we can save endangered species or recreate extinct ones. This statement is rather against genetic engineering because it says that this is not true. This cannot happen. Well, as a matter of fact, this statement is false, and we can do that, but we are looking at what this statement says, and that is definitely against. If you are faced with death by heart failure or the offer of an animal heart transplant, which would you choose? Well, most people are going in this situation are going to choose the uh, offer of an animal heart transplant. Living with the organ of an animal is better than dying. So that's what most people are going to choose. So this is something that is an advantage of genetic engineering. Many scientists report emotional difficulties with what they have to do to animals. In laboratories, scientists do experiments on animals that causes emotional difficulties for them, and that is something negative, so it is against. 6. New breeds of new types of farm animals can be made more quickly by genetic engineering with precisely determined characteristics like lean meat, which contains little or no fat, or fast growth. We can make animals that make good meat with no fat or little fat, or animals that grow rapidly thanks to genetic engineering. So that is an advantage, and that is 4. In 7, we could recreate extinct species by cloning the DNA and inserting in suitable host cells, thus maintaining global diversity. If we recreate some extinct species, we can, using genetic engineering, we can maintain global biodiversity, diversity in the environment and nature. And that is something positive. That is an advantage. So it is 4. 8. Cloned animals have chromosomes which show structural modifications equivalent to adult animals. So, if we clone animals, they will be adults, old before their time. Thus, they are old before their time, so that is something negative. We're taking no. 9. There is a big risk. So when talking about risk, which is something negative, we're going to take in negative. There is a big risk when transplanting animal organs into human beings. If we take an organ from an animal and transplant it into a human, there is a big risk that animal diseases in animals, and viruses that are in animals, dormant, not active, in animal genomes, could be transferred into human population. If we take an organ from an animal and put it into a human, that a human can be sick as a result of getting some diseases from animals, in the dormant viruses in animals, and then he can pass them to other humans. So that is something negative. So we're going to take two in against. 10. Dolly the sheep that was cloned to produce sheep whose milk and had more proteins that are believed to help treat diseases such as emphysema, hemophilia, and cystic fibrosis. So we can use the milk of some animals, we can make their milk better, and can be more effective in treating some diseases, so which is something positive. So 4. 11. There is no simple link between genes and diseases. If there is no simple link between genes and diseases, then why do we need genetic engineering for? So we don't need genetic engineering at all if there is no link between genes and diseases. So that is against, because we don't need genetic engineering in the first place if there is no simple link between genes and diseases. Here we have an example of an eye cancer gene that was from humans, that was inserted into mice. It produced abnormalities, but there were no symptoms of eye cancer. Moving on to the last page of that section, genetic engineering applied to plants and crops. In one, genetic pollution, again, we're going to talk about whether these statements, not our own opinion, whether these statements are for or against genetic engineering. So genetic pollution from transgenes spreads into other organisms. It can never be reversed or cleaned up. If we make modification on genes, that will cause genetic pollution. By that we mean that the transgenes, the genes that were changed, are going to spread into other organisms, from plant to plant, and then from plant to animals, and then from animals to humans. This is going to be irreversible and can never be cleaned up. So this is something very dangerous, and that's why it is against. The second, genetic engineering in plants, genetically engineered plants are carefully tested for environmental and ecological impact. This is the solution to this problem mentioned in statement 1. We need careful tests for environmental and ecological impact in genetically engineered plants, including their effect on worms in the ground and beneficial insects. Some insects are beneficial. We should not kill them by genetic engineering. So this statement is 4. Why 4? Because it says that genetically engineered plants are carefully tested for environmental and ecological impact. In order to solve these problems of genetic pollution, they make lots of tests before using genetically engineered plants, because this problem, if it happens, it is going to be irreversible. 3, it reduces labor costs. The costs of workers having too many employees costs a lot, and that can be reduced thanks to genetic engineering, and that is something positive. 4, there are damaging, irreversible effects on health caused by genetically engineered foods. This is a reality today. Foods that are genetically engineered can cause damaging, irreversible effects. That is something mainly causing cancer, and that is something against. 5, genetic engineering allows the creation of plants that produce vaccines and pharmaceuticals. We can use genetic engineering to create plants that produce vaccines and medicine, so which is something positive. 4. 6, to transfer desirable qualities from one organism to another, for example, to make a crop resistant to an herbicide or to enhance food value. So we can take some qualities from one organism, from one plant, for example, and put it in another and transfer it into other plants. For example, to make a crop resistant to an herbicide or to enhance food production or value or quality and quantity. That is something positive. The process of inserting genes can damage normal genes. If we transfer some genes from plant to plant or animal to animal, that can damage normal genes. This is something negative. That every damage is negative, so that is going to be against. In 8, it enhances biodiversity by allowing weeds to continue growing for longer, thus providing nutrition for animals. So we've seen that the word enhance means to make something better or bigger. So that enhances biodiversity by allowing some plants to continue growing for longer, and as a result providing nutrition, food for animals. So that is something positive 4. In 9, increased use of chemicals on crops. If we use chemicals on crops, and that is something that is getting bigger and bigger every day, results in increased contamination of our water supply and food. If we put chemicals on plants, we're going to contaminate our food with chemicals. And if it rains, that water is going to go where we can one day drink it. So that is something negative against. 10. The loss of biodiversity in crops and the disturbance of the ecological balance. If we use genetic engineering, we can lose biodiversity in crops by favoring some types of plants or animals over others, and that will cause a disturbance of the ecological balance. We disturb the ecological balance, and that is something negative, so it is against. Last, we have the ability to feed the world's population. We can feed everybody in the world without the risks posed by genetic engineering. We can do that without the need for genetic engineering, without these risks of genetic engineering. So we don't need genetic engineering to feed the world's population. So we don't need genetic engineering in the first place. So that is something against, because we don't need it according to that statement. Well, we're done with that, with this section. A long one, rather a difficult one because of the vocabulary items used that can be new or somehow difficult. We're done. Well, I'll see you. I hope that was helpful. As I said, you'll find the listening passages in the description below the video. You can download them and listen to them and pause whenever you need to listen carefully. I hope that was helpful. I'll see you in the next section.